Alright, something special for the service today. I'm using the correct translation for once. I shouldn't say things like that. I shouldn't encourage the King James only people. Today, I'm starting in 2 Kings 6 with verse 14. My poor beat up Bible. That's always the thing about keepsakes. You get them at such a young age, you don't realize how valuable they are and you're not careful enough with them. 2 Kings 6, verse 14. Therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host. And they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. Lord, I thank you for the word this morning, that you are the God of angel armies, that you are on our side for all that you do for us and give us. I pray you would bless this sermon, use it to the best of your will, and that you'd continue to be with us with guidance and wisdom throughout the rest of the day and the coming week. I pray that everything would stay in your hands and stay in your will. In your name, amen. As has been pointed out in our continuing, I think I did actually, in our continuing Bible studies, one of the favorite terms ascribed to God, especially in the Old Testament, is the Lord of angel armies, or the Lord of the heavenly host. Which is an interesting distinction. Obviously, God is the God of every army, technically speaking. He created the entire universe, after all, which happens to be where most armies are. And in a lot of ways, since he commands nature and the storm and the sea, it feels a bit redundant to point out that he commands the heavenly host as well. But it certainly makes for an interesting mental image, to say the least of which. To go on to verse 17, And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. The context for this passage is that Israel is being invaded again by a mighty army, many times the size of the Israelites. But because Elisha is a praying and God-fearing man, he is able to discern the king's movements and where he's going and what he's going to do. So he is able to warn the Israelites' king. And it's, even when you have an army much smaller than the enemy's, it's pretty easy to win battles when you know exactly what the other guy is going to do. So the king of, let's say Syria, it's usually Syria, he asks his own servants, hey, what gives? Which one of you is a spy for Israel? Because they clearly have one, because they always know what we're going to do before we do it. And his advisors tell him, no. We're all loyal, we're all faithful, totally. What's going on is that Israel has this God and this prophet of their God who practically can hear what you say to yourself in your bed chamber. He knows everything you're saying, everything you're doing. So if you want to win this war, nondescript king of Syria number 27 or whatever it is, you have to take care of that prophet. So the king says, all right, what city is he in? And sends an entire army to that city after this one guy. Imagine if, I don't know, Germany's invasion plans involved making sure you get that every time. Billy Graham! Making sure you get that Billy Graham guy. I swear I want to call him Paul Bunyan. I have no idea why. That's not his name. That's someone else. I cannot explain to you why I get those two names confused. But the analogy still stands. It's an invading army and they're diverting to go after one guy, and he's just a priest to boot. Just a priest. So I don't think he's even a priest. I don't know if Elisha was a Levite. I just know he's a prophet. So Elisha's young man, his apprentice of sorts, wakes up, sees that there's an army outside, and goes to Elisha and says, "That's a problem." And the prophet reassures the young man, "Hey, don't worry about it. There are more people on our side than there are on his." And opens his eyes to see the heavenly host surrounding the army, surrounding the city that has God's prophet. This is neat. This is really cool imagery, and very reassuring imagery to know what forces really stand with us in our ongoing day-to-day life and struggles, which hopefully will be slightly less severe than an entire army is gunning for you personally. However, this is not generally Old or New Testament how God operates things. This is not his normal modus operandi. You will find very few places throughout the Old Testament where God utilizes his army, as it were, on the surface at least. After all, Egypt, pursuing Israel, is destroyed by the Red Sea. Goliath and many, many other great giants were slain by David, and not by angelic forces. Or at least what we would describe as. There's certainly an argument to be made that it was invisible angels God used to move the Red Sea or to allow David to defeat Goliath, but we're just splitting hairs at that point. The point is, generally speaking, when we find ourselves in a pinch, a massive army of fiery chariots is not number one on the list of most likely things you will see rescuing you. But it is important to remember that that is what God can do if he so chooses, but more often leaves it up to, seemingly, leaves it up to us. He doesn't actually. It's very doubtful that David could have slain Goliath with a slingshot without the help of God controlling his aim and the wind and making sure it hit a vital spot. I shouldn't say slingshot because that does give you the wrong idea. A sling in the Old Testament wording is basically the most dangerous ranged weapon until bows and arrows are invented, which are basically the most dangerous weapon until guns are invented. Like, that is not a little kid's toy that David was using to defeat Goliath. That was a proper, lethal weapon. But even when it is warlike men or soldiers who march out to battle in the name of something good and valuable, you can tell it was just 4th of July. It's still God behind them. He's still the one ultimately in charge of outcomes, victories, battles. I don't think there's a war that has ever been waged that hasn't had God involved in its outcome. Every little thing, every little lost order that gets intercepted by the enemy, or it rains so much an army gets stuck in the mud, or the general was just plain dumb and did something uncharacteristically wrong. Every little bump in the road, as it were, ultimately goes back to the man in charge of the weather. And it's interesting to see how he moves and how he expects us to move in return. I have been thoroughly enjoying lately the modern era that we live in and our ability to discover things that you would have never found without the ability to waste time just standing around watching television. I discovered this week a obscure black and white western called The Restless Gun. And when I say obscure, I mean bonanza, Gunsmoke, Have Gun Will Travel, Restless Gun. Even I've never heard of this before. I've never watched it before. I don't recognize the lead actor. And it's okay, it's pretty good. It's your traditional 20-minute black and white western fare. But it did have a stark reminder that our society used to be much different in its approach to Christianity. To summarize, our main character, our restless gun, stays with a missionary and his wife and his son, who has just become an adult. The missionary and his wife are killed by rampaging American Indians, as was wont to happen in the black and white era. And the son, interestingly to me, first of all, the son wants to go kill as many American Indians as he can, with our main character reminding him over and over again that you can't just go shooting people because they look like the people who happened to kill your parents. Friendly reminder that even in the 1950s, a vast majority of people thought bigotry was kind of stupid, as a majority of people throughout history have found it kind of stupid. But more interestingly, the young man demands of our main character, who again is a gunslinger, he shoots people frequently, he demands of him where God was, why he would just stand by and watch a missionary get killed when he was completely innocent. And the gunfighter, being a man more of actions than words, or however they would word it, doesn't really have an answer for him right away. So we'll leave that story for now as the son goes off to try to shoot a rampaging band of warriors, or any innocent he can get his hands on. As we return back to the Bible, because it is fascinating to me that this kind of thing is not typically condoned in our Christian lifestyle and culture. As Romans has it, Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 14, I believe. Nope, starting in verse 19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give peace unto wrath. Give place unto wrath, I should say. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. And that stands out to me, because God doesn't say there is not a place for vengeance. He actually tells you to let him take care of it, that there very much so is a place, and it's his. Which makes sense. We all may have our parents who we love deeply, or our siblings, or our wives, or even just our friends from work we can mostly put up with. But God cares about all of those people far more than you do. Which is an interesting thing to realize, that no matter how much you may deeply love someone, God was willing to die for that person. Which for a majority of our relationships, no matter how well we love them, I feel like the list of people we are willing to die for probably isn't as long as many of us wish it was. And all of those people are on that list for him. He cares about everyone. So as angry as you get when you see someone being mistreated, as angry as you might be if someone hit your wife, or insults your brother, or what have you, God is 10 times as offended. Because he is capable of so much more than we are, and that includes emotions like a desire for justice. And he is more than capable of meting it out. Not only in this life, but especially in the life to come. And quite frankly, we're not going to do anything but give ourselves in trouble if we try to do his job. So we are given, as individual Christians, a very different set of rules and guidelines. The famous example is Jesus' reaction to the Old Testament law being not an eye for an eye, but if someone hits you, turn the other cheek. If someone demands you go walk a mile with them, you walk two. But that's because Jesus is preaching to a different group of people than the Old Testament is, frankly. The Old Testament, especially with the eye for an eye, a cheek for a cheek thing, is a civil law for a country, a guide for how society should be structured, which is very different from how you as an individual should interact with someone. It should obviously be illegal for you to steal things. The law of the land, how a civil society is structured, should not allow you to go out and rob a bank. If you notice your neighbor robbing a bank, it's a lot murkier about what your moral responsibility towards that is. In a certain time and place, like a black and white Western, it's your moral responsibility to shoot him. In the modern era, it's your moral responsibility to snap a picture with your cell phone and send it to the police. Man, robbing banks just isn't as easy as it once was. In New Testament times, if you are a Christian living under the yoke of the Roman Empire, I frankly think you don't have a particular moral responsibility to that. Because presumably it's a Roman-ran bank, which means it's money that they stole from your neighbors in the first place. It's not the most morally incorrect thing to rebel against the Roman Empire, 9 times out of 10. They were mean. But it's interesting that they're not told to join in the rebellion or anything. The going 2 miles with someone, that is specifically aimed at Roman soldiers. If they ask for you to go with them, basically as a civilian hostage, so no one tries to bushwhack him when he's on the road, because they might get you instead, Jesus says you're obligated to go 2 miles with them. The way the Bible puts it, it is the responsibility of the civil authority, of the government, of the kings and lawmakers to make a just and fair society, which involves punishments for the criminals, for the wrongdoers. But as individuals, it is your responsibility to love and care for people as far as it is possible with you. Because those are 2 very different things. Because if you go out and kill your neighbor because they did something wrong, suddenly you're the one in trouble. We are tasked with not trying to fight fire with fire as it is, but overcoming evil with good. By fighting back in the way God prescribes. To go back to the book of 2 Kings and chapter 6, down to verse 18, I believe. And when they came down to him, the enemy army, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, Smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. And Elisha said unto them, This is not the way, neither is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. But he led them to Samaria, which is not where the person they were seeking was. And it came to pass when they were come into Samaria, that Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. And the king of Israel said unto Elisha, when he saw them, My father, shall I smite them? Shall I smite them? And he answered, Thou shalt not smite them. Wouldest thou smite those whom thou hast taken captive with thy sword and with thy bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink, and go to their master. So first of all, the nerve of the king of Israel, because keep in mind this is Elisha, which means he spends every other chapter almost getting executed by the king of Israel. So yeah, my father, shall I do your will? Convenient. My will is for you to stop trying to kill me. Would be nice. But more than that, I think it's interesting that the message here really comes out to, if God desires military victory, God will have military victory. He has an army of flaming chariots. How are you supposed to fight that? It's not fair. But more often, he wants us to seek other alternatives. Probably not the ability to make an entire army blind, but something closer to that than overwhelming military force, which outside of a couple places, America is an exception. I would argue medieval Europe is an exception. The Roman Empire towards the end when it was converted. A majority of the time, Christians do not have armies to call on. A majority of us will not be blessed enough to live under a King David. We are much more likely, statistically speaking, to get But it should be remembered that the king of the universe, the heaviest hitter out there, is still on our side and will be watching out for us and giving us other ways to win outside of the literal battlefield more often than not. To go back and finish our Western story, the young man out to kill 200 American Indians to avenge his parents is a dopey young man, so falls off a rock and breaks his leg, because of course he did. He gets taken in by members of the same tribe who massacred his parents, who are peaceful because they were close friends to the missionary, and they were believers in the message he was giving them. So when the bad guy American Indian shows up, and our main character is off being useless wrestling with someone somewhere, the man who was tending and caring for the young man shoots the warrior who had murdered the missionary in order to protect the young man and keep him from killing him. And of course we get the backstory that the American Indian was rampaging in the first place because white men had killed his parents. Revenge begots revenge a good deal more often than it closes any books. It tends to start a lot more fights than it does finish them. But the fact remains that due to the actions of his own father, the young man is saved by a man who he would have happily shot the night before. And it solemnly ends with him telling our lone gunfighter that he thinks he understands where God was in it all. The actions of missionaries, of martyrs, of people willing to sacrifice themselves has done a lot of good in the history of humankind, and is typically speaking how the church operates, how we move forwards, and how we win. It is nice when we have massive angel armies, of course, and we should always be looking and praying and never risking ourselves unnecessarily. But when it comes down to it, God is found just as often in sacrificing your own life as he is in triumphant victory. Before we dismiss this morning, is there any other special needs, prayers, or requests? All right then, if Sister Jennifer would bless the food.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here safe and sound. Please take us home safe and bring us back at the appointed time. Nourish this food unto our bodies and keep us safe. Amen.
Amen.